Lighting ratios. What are they, and should you care? If you've studied studio lighting at all, you may have heard a bit about something called lighting ratios. Basically, ratios are a way to compare the strength of the main light on the subject to the strength of the fill light, or the shadows. In other words, how light or dark are the shadows? When I first learned studio lighting, what I did is I actually learned to create different setups and different ratios between the highlights and shadow side of the face as a way to control contrast and mood of the shot. So basically, if the difference between the two is greater, then the shadows are going to be darker. And when the difference is less, when they're more similar, it means that the shadows and the highlights are similarly illuminated. So in other words, the shadows are going to be filled in. They could be even eliminated. All right, so let's take a moment to pop over in the studio, and we're going to explore how you can determine lighting ratios and then use them to control the power of your light, to control the ratios between light and shadow. Now we're going to take a look at lighting ratios in action in the studio. And where I'm going to begin is I'm going to have two studio strobes, and I'm going to begin with the same power output on both of them. So I have a main light and a fill light. So if both of them are the same power, what does the shot look like? Well, what it means is there are no shadows. The image is going to be completely flat because the fill light matches the main light. So that's where we're going to begin. And I have my camera set on ISO 200, 1/200th of a second, f11. So I know that's where I want my main light to read and the fill light. They both need to read f11. So I'm going to use a meter to make sure that's where I start. And then what I'm going to do is when they're both equal, I'm going to take my fill and I'm going to go a stop less. And then another stop less, and then another stop less, so you can see what it means when I change the ratios, when I change the power between the two. So let me begin by getting my main light correct. All right. And I want it to read f11. Perfect, so f11 on that one. And then on my fill, I also want it to read f11. No shadows, everything nice and even. Okay. Try the same thing. Make sure I'm not blocking the light. Perfect. F11. Okay, so now I already know what the picture will roughly look like. Nice and flat and even. And if you see any differences between the left and right side of the photo, it's because we are using different size and different types of modifiers. So if you try this at home, let's say that you have a large umbrella as the main light and then maybe a zoom reflector or a bare bulb as the fill, the shadows will be wiped out, but the texture of the skin will look different because you're using different modifiers, different quality of light. So now, I already know I have these nice and even. I see that in the shot. I want to change up the ratios. I want to decrease the power of my fill. What's nice about my strobes is if I am at a setting of 8, if I decrease it, turn the power down to 7, I know I decrease the power by 1 stop. Or I can also take a meter reading. So right now I'm at f11, I would have my meter read f8 to go down a stop. So let's turn the power down 1 stop. Okay, and let's get my meter reading. Okay, f8. So now, this light is going to be 1 stop less than the main light, which means 1 stop down is you're cutting the light in half. So it's going to be half as bright as the main light. All right. Okay. So you see that the shadows are a little bit more noticeable now, but they're still filled in. There's still a lot of detail. If you have your fill light 1 stop less, it's giving you shadows, but still with a lot of illumination. Let's say we want to get a little bit more dramatic, a little bit darker in the shadows. Well, what I can do is I can decrease the power of the fill light 1 more stop. So it'll be 1/4 the power of that main light. So let's do that again. Go down a stop, and I can take a reading. So it's going to be from f8 to f5.6. Perfect, f5.6. This is what's nice about being able to control the power and stops on your strobe. So now, shadows get a little bit darker, a little bit more defined. So they started off even, 1 stop less, they're filled in, but there's a little bit of shape and sculpting. 2 stops less, gets a little bit darker. But let's say I actually want drama. If I actually want the shadows to be more dramatic, I'm gonna go to 3 stops less. So we'll make them start to have that shadowy, dramatic look. So I'm gonna go 3 stops less, which means I just turned it down 1 more stop. So I'm 3 stops less now, so 5/6 to 4/0, right? From 5/6 to 4/0, I got the reading that I wanted. So now, if you look now, my shadows start to get dark. They start to get mysterious. But if you look at it, with 3 stops less, I still absolutely have detail in my shadows. So typically, when a photographer wants to have dark shadows that still maintain the detail, they aim for this ratio, the fill light to be 3 stops less. When you start to get to 4 stops and below, you start to lose detail in the shadow. So I'm gonna go to 4 stops. You'll take a look at what that means, and pretty much anything below that, detail's gone. So 1 more stop down. Great. Perfect. All right, so 1 stop down all the way. So right now, main light's full power. This is 4 stops less. Let's take a shot. Okay, so now I'm 4 stops less than my main light, and the shadows are very, very dark. This is the point where you start losing your detail. But if you want to go even darker, you can turn off that light, or you bring in your negative fill if you want that shadow to be even heavier. And so this is when you have to be aware of your environment, be aware of light bouncing off of other things, reflectors, walls, carpets, anything like that, when you're trying to get the fill light to be many stops less than the main light side of the face. All right, so if you take a look at these images, it's not really about setting up exactly what the ratios are, and you don't necessarily have to meter, but you might know, okay, I would like to have dark shadows but still maintain detail. You probably want to be right around the -3 stops, the 3 stops under on the fill light side. So if you know that, you don't have to guess, you can go ahead and meter, and then you know you have shadows but with detail. Or maybe you want to have some sculpting on the face, like you want to see a little bit of shadow, but you want it to be mostly filled in. So that would lead you around the -1 stop power on the fill light. So it's more thinking of it like that. If you know the effect you want to achieve, you know the appropriate ratio, the comparison between the two, and you can either make it look right by changing the powers and using your eye, or you can meter so you have repeatability and saving yourself time guessing. In truth, nowadays, I do not meter ratios at all. I don't really think about them. I'm adjusting the power of the light or the distance of the reflector to get the contrast or detail I want. The important thing is not that I measure it, but it's that I'm thinking about the detail in the shadows as part of my creative and technical decision-making process. So now you've had a look at how you can purposely make decisions over how light or dark your shadows are. And you can specifically use numbers to compare this lightness or darkness to the main light. When beginning in studio photography, it may be helpful if you want to put a quantity or numbers to what you are creating and help you to recreate these ratios. In other words, you can think of light like this. If I want the shadows to be darker, I can turn down my fill light or back away the reflector. If I want the shadows to be brighter or more filled in, I can turn up my fill light or bring the reflector closer. For educational purposes, I think that it's helpful for you to see what happens to a shot when you vary the ratios between the highlight and shadow side of the face, because it's going to give you an idea of what look suits you best for a particular image, what you are trying to achieve. One thing that's really nice about ratios is that it's time saving. It gives you repeatability. If you're using your light meter right away and you use your ratios, you're going to know what the shadows will look like. You don't have to try to guess. And if you need to do the same setup in the future, you're going to be able to achieve it precisely. This is really useful if you know you want the shadows to be dark but with detail. You know exactly what ratio you need to achieve.